having happened, some child had been injured or something. In other words, there were slight offsets that I think were attributable to the fact that they weren't sticking us back in exactly the same timeline, but a slightly adjacent one.
That's a little bit tricky, isn't it? That could upset things if you try to grasp for reality in one sense and find a central node point, so to speak. But did that affect you as well, emotionally and psychologically, that you couldn't kind of pin down reality in a way almost?
It didn't bother me in the slightest when I perceived it. I thought, well, something weird is going on here, because a conversation that I had with one of my siblings or something was suddenly forgot by them. And I kind of wrote it off to the fact that they were still my siblings, but clearly I knew that we were having some offsets. So it was almost as if I was returning to 99.99% the same reality, but there was always that 0.01 distortion. I just pretty much just wrote off to experience. It really didn't alarm me, but I definitely detected it when I was on the project. And then later in 1980, they had me jump between Van Nuys and Los Alamos and back to try to correct quantum slippage that was actually occurring, because on one of the nights, my dad had failed to get me through the teleport at Sandia before 9 p.m. There was like a witching hour that had passed. And so they knew by my junior high school years in Southern California that I was quantum slipping. I'd have these experiences where I'd be putting my books in my locker during the passing period between classes, and then suddenly all the noise of the kids horse playing around me would stop, and I would find myself alone at my locker. And I would go to my next class and find out that I was 5 minutes late. So that quantum slipping was detected by 1980, and they tried to correct it. They also made an attempt to correct it in 1989 when I was pulled out of my first year of law school in order to go to Albuquerque and then drive to Socorro, New Mexico, where I participated in this technical activity involving a magnetosphere, this big, huge magnet. And Courtney Hunt told me that if I didn't go on that trip and participate in that technical activity, I would, quote unquote, fall into the cosmic soup. He said, well, I didn't say cosmic. He said, you're going to fall into the drink. And what I think they knew is that I was quantum slipping, and they were worried about me becoming quantum destabilized in a much more serious way. So yes, there were quantum side effects that were evident when each time we returned to New Jersey in our original timeline.
All right, and
so Connie.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Well, so Connie makes the statement in front of us, and my dad scowls at her like, Connie, I'm only sharing this stuff with you so you won't blab about it in front of Andy, because my dad was trying to preserve the seamlessness of my life. He was trying to make sure that things evolved in real time as they knew they would, without any diverting selection pressure being artificially imposed by me having foreknowledge of what was going to be happening. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so he was trying to maintain sort of the artisanal perfection or seamlessness of the arc of my own experience, right? Because they knew what I was destined to be involved in, but I didn't, and I wasn't supposed to, unless they had made an executive decision. So, okay, let's tell Andy this so he can deal with it. And we know they've been doing that with at least the last 4 U.S. presidents. And I think on the last show with you, I described my meetings with both President Bush's when I was on the project, and then my accidental meeting with Barack Obama in 1982 when we were college students, when they showed foreknowledge of the presidency. So in some instances, if the future event is serious enough and they can work with the person to positively prepare for and anticipate and accept the future event, they clearly had made a decision to sometimes apprise an individual what their destiny held. But in the main, they were supposed to keep that information secret because the person didn't need to know their own future.
Gotcha.
So, yeah.
And there's many things that we can touch upon and where we can go, so to speak, from here. You mentioned before in the first hour in this interview that 1981 you did a trip to Mars. Was that your first one? And if so, tell us a little bit about that.
Right. Well, yeah. The only remaining data point was when I was allowed to read my paper in 1971. So they clearly had a concern that they take the data from the future, from the paper, and fold it back in time and apprise me of what I was destined to find. That had clearly been prioritized as an intelligence community methodology. They clearly wanted to make young Andy aware of the fact that he was destined to reveal major data that's on Mars. And I think it was in the spirit of that kind of acclamation to the data, that I was approached in the summer of 1981, and they put this career CIA officer in my life named Courtney M. Hunt. Courtney was a cousin of the Hunts of Texas, the prominent oil, family, the Hunt dynasty of Texas, through their Orange County, California relations. And he had joined the CIA during the Korean War and participated in parachute drops into Korea. In fact, in one of them, he broke his back, so he had lower back trouble, I remember. And so he was career CIA. They put him in my life as sort of, I don't want to say a mentor, because his involvement in my life was ultimately pretty de minimis, but he was sort of a conduit or a briefing officer, so that if the government needed me to do something, or they needed to, like, for example, when they contacted me when I was in law school in 1989 and told me to get to New Mexico because I had to participate in some kind of technical activity, it was Courtney Hunt who called me and said, Andy, the air bill is going to be sent to your box there at your apartment complex. You're going to New Mexico. It's not something we can argue about. You're going, that we can discuss. Okay. So Hunt was, in a sense, my contact officer to CIA. He did some minimal training, and he also was, to some extent, investigating me. I can't say he was handling me because his involvement in my life was not that substantial. It was more or less, he was the CIA guy in our town. And he was an adult acquaintance who sometimes trained me regarding something like this jump to Mars in 1981, and sometimes he was just sharing information with me. Sometimes he was asking me about my project experiences in the early 70s to answer a question that the CIA had about Project Pegasus. So he was simply an adult connected to the CIA that they put in my life that summer of 81. Throughout that early part of that summer, June, early July, he kept on asking the same question: do you want to go to Mars? And I initially said, you mean on a rocket ship? And he looked at me like I was crazy. He said, you know how we can get people places? Maybe a rocket ship. And I said, oh, yes, okay, so we're going to be teleporting there? And he goes, yeah, of course. And I really told him, no, I don't. Why would I want to go to Mars? Why would I want to put my feet on terra incognita? I didn't really view it as hugely scary, but it was certainly something that I had no desire to do. I could see maybe going up, being an astronaut and going up in the space shuttle or something. But the idea of going to Mars was unpleasant. It wasn't something that I longed to do. So I initially told him no.
What age were you here, by the way?
Huh?
What age were you when you got this question, by the way?
I turned 20 in September of 1981. So
20, okay.
This was, 19 years and 10 months. I was almost 20.
Mm.
And I was an adventuresome enough lad. I mean, I swam in the ocean, and I hiked in relatively remote locations when we were camping and stuff. I wanted to see the rest of the world, and I've tried to since then when I've been able to, but I didn't really want to become implicated in being on the surface of Mars, because one of my concerns was, what if I can't get back? I mean, in other words, there was a deracinating implication to it. It was rather than being terra firma or even the moon, and having seen those images of the Apollo astronauts on the moon, I thought, well, I could put on a spacesuit and go up on a rocket and maybe land on the moon like Armstrong and Aldrin did and the others. But the idea of going all the way to Mars and getting home, it just bespoke the possibility of being in a forbidding environment and being stuck there. And so it was just a set of circumstances I really didn't want to implicate myself in. So I told him no. But he kept on asking throughout the summer of 1981. And finally in July, I said, look, I'll go. Actually, we had a conversation where I said, Courtney, why do I have to go? And he said, because the survival of the human race depends on it. And that really took me back, and I thought, well, you mean even if I die in transit or I perish there on the surface of Mars, it's for the best possible reason? And he said, yes. He said, and Andy, it's not negotiable. You have to go. The key thing now is for you to psychologically prepare to go, because we're sending you.
Did they motivate that phrase with anything? The survival of the human race? Did they tell you why?
No, but that's a direct quote. The discussion that I had with Hunt, in which I said, okay, I'm going, even though I'm not particularly welcoming of the idea of being on terra incognita, as it were, on Mars, that conversation persuaded me to relent and say, okay, what do I need to train for this? Because, I had been a child, and I knew how they run you through these training programs. I mean, all of the quantum access things that we did in Pegasus, we would have these sort of colloquia on the front end. So I knew what I was going to be going through. I was going to be going through